thank you for joining us. There's still a few more people coming in, but we'll get started if that's okay. So housekeeping wise, we are keen, obviously, as we have done with the previous sessions and future ones, to record the sessions, and we'll be posting them up on our YouTube channel, hopefully a day or two after the event, so you can either watch back or share with colleagues who couldn't make it. So just to let you know that we will be recording, we'll be making sure that videos and microphones are off for that purpose. So if you can help us by keeping your microphones on mute, that would be really helpful. And for this evening's session, really pleased to say that we have, for those of you that are accredited with either Naroso and BASIS, we have a CPD point for each available for tonight's session. So a point for Naroso and a point for BASIS. So if that's of interest to you, then if you want to let Joe or myself know after the event, we can give you the registration code so you can claim your points. Practical things around questions as well. Alister will talk 45 minutes or so, then we'll probably have 10-15 minutes for questions at the end. So any questions you do have, if you could please put them in the chat, and there are 2 or 3 of us behind the scenes will be monitoring the chat, and we'll ask Ian to ask your question on your behalf, or as many of them as we can fit in the time available. So any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat at any time in the presentation, and we'll make sure they get across to Ian to be asked. And in terms of the prize draw for this evening as well, we'll be making the draw for the lucky winner in the next kind of 24 hours, 36 hours or so. So if you are the lucky winner drawn out of the hat, we will let you know directly and hopefully how to claim the prize. And Alister, we can talk more about how we get the your weather station measuring kit installed. So very excited prize. Thank you, Alister, for putting that up for tonight. Much appreciated. So hopefully that's enough of the housekeeping and enough from me. I'll hand over to Ian Waller now to introduce the session and get us underway. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you very much, Nick. Welcome everybody to number 5 of our series of 6 webinars. The idea behind these is to engage with you and enlighten you and get you in the right mindset for countryside stewardship presently, and sort of leading into environmental land management. And we obviously don't know a massive amount about environmental land management at the moment, but the idea of these is to get you into the sort of the different areas of thinking that will potentially be in environmental land management. So I'm Ian Waller. I'm a member of the Chilterns Conservation Board, and I'm also chair of the Central Chilterns Cluster Farmers. So I'll tell you a little bit of what I know of Alister. I know Alister reasonably well. I think I've known him about 10 years. He's involved in Affinity Water on the Catchment side. Very engaging chap. I've certainly enjoyed spending time with him. I show him around my farm once a year with his team to sort of show them the way I'm currently farming. So I have good interaction with them, and I'm pleased to be involved with him. Really, it's really good that they've got catchment officers trying to help us and guide us into various ways of improving how we keep pesticides, soil and those sort of things out of water. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Alister Leggatt from Affinity Water. Alister, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Ian. I'm just in the process of sharing my screen. Just bear with me a second. Can you see the presentation?
All right. Yes, I can. Want to go on full screen. That's it. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Ian. And as mentioned, yeah, my name is Alister Leggatt. I'm a catchment manager at Affinity Water. I've been working for Affinity Water, who are the public water supply company in the region, for about 15 years now. And about 10 years ago, I was given the project of implementing a catchment management program for Affinity, with the primary focus of addressing some of the water quality challenges that we see coming in from our catchments. This has grown significantly in the past 10 years. The initial focus was around a pesticide called metaldehyde, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. But we've grown in size and scale since then, and really our vision for how catchment management can, both improve drinking water quality, but also the wider environment. So it was a very pleased to be given this opportunity to talk this evening of this webinar. I've called it water-friendly farming, but I am very conscious that there was a long-term water-friendly farming project that was initiated by the Freshwater Habitats Trust several years ago, which has looked into great detail around some of the agri-environment measures and the kind of the impact and benefits that they can have to the water environment. So I'm not going to copy the information that's come out there. So I'm going to give a water company perspective and very much my kind of experience and my journey as a catchment officer into a catchment manager over the years, and hopefully some of what we've been learning, investigating will be of benefit for the attendees this evening. So for those of you not familiar with Affinity Water, we are the largest of the water-only supply companies. So we don't supply wastewater services, but we do supply around 3.5 million people with, on average, about 900 million litres of water a day. And you can see from the map there that we have 3 distinct supply areas. About 65% of the total water we supply comes from groundwater chalk aquifers, which is what I'm going to focus mainly on this evening. But the remaining water that we supply our population comes directly from the River Thames, from 4 large water treatment works in West London. So, I mean, we have over 100 groundwater abstractions across our region, each with their own distinct catchment and challenges. And then with the River Thames, as you see there, the upstream catchment is about 11,000 square kilometres that's at risk from a range of pollutants. So as a catchment manager, I have a number of challenges that we have to look at. So some of the challenges that face water supply in our region, I think we do face some of the largest challenges really of any water company, particularly around climate change. We are already seeing less predictable weather patterns. This poses particular challenges. I mean, even in the time that I've been working at Affinity, I've seen 2 drought periods and 2 major flooding events, and they bring very unique and distinct challenges, both in terms of being able to supply drinking water and also preserving the quality of it. We are in an area of serious water stress. I mean, per head of population, we have an equivalent kind of per capita consumption and an availability equivalent of areas of southern Spain and parts of the Middle East. So it's something that, how we manage our supplies is a huge challenge. We also have huge amount of population growth predicted, ongoing. I mean, we've all seen that, housing developments going up everywhere, where there's predicted to be about 1.5 million increase in population over the next 50 years or so. We also have some of the highest water consumption in the country as well, which is a big challenge and an area that we really need to drive down consumption and improve efficiency of water. And this is primarily both from the ability to continue to be able to supply water into the future, but also the impact that abstracting water has on the environment, and particularly impact to the rare chalk stream habitats, of which we have a significant percentage of the global chalk streams within our supply area. And we are very aware that we have to do things very differently, both in the terms of abstraction, but also in the way that the wider land is managed. And I've put in this list pollution incidents at the end of this, because obviously this is the area that I do focus mostly in on, and preserving the water availability that we have left is absolutely critical. And I know, my experience, we've been on average losing about 1 source per year for a significant period of time to various pollution incidents. So, maintaining, a wholesome supply of water whilst dealing with the challenges is a huge undertaking. So what is water in our area at risk from? And I have to say, I was when I was practicing this presentation, I was looking at this image and looking at all the wide-ranging sources of pollution, and currently we are dealing with ongoing pollution issues that pretty much cover all of the different pollutant sources you can see there on that image. And it just shows that, you know, this isn't just an agricultural challenge, it's a challenge for industry, dealing with issues of historic contamination, but, you know, it's just general land management, future development, you know, development on contaminated land, brownfield sites. They all pose very unique challenges. And as you can see, there are a range of pollutants that are, you know, pose a risk to public water supply and also to the wider environment. I'm going to predominantly focus on nitrate and pesticides within this talk, because that, you know, I really needed to condense down and focus in on certain issues. But, you know, we do experience turbidity, microbiological issues. We've got issues with hydrocarbons, other contaminants, heavy metals, solvents, you know, and there are emerging risks that we will have to, you know, really get a better understanding of, both in terms of where they're coming from and what we can do with them. So, yeah, but I am going to focus on nitrate and pesticides particularly today. So just a little bit about catchment management, and this is very much my kind of perspective on catchment management. We originally started our program of work focusing in on water quality challenges. We really, the essence of what we're trying to achieve with myself and my team is to really understand, the impact of pollutants on the receptor, in this case, the water treatment works, but that can also be the wider environment, rivers and groundwater bodies. We really want to understand where they're coming from and, the source, and also what we can do in terms of reducing the source of the pollutant, but also eliminating the pathway, understanding why that particular contaminant is getting into water and what really can be done about it. And really my focus is working with land managers, businesses within catchments to truly understand what is happening, why it's happening, and find solutions to these challenges. And that's going to be the focus of my talk this evening. So I'm aware, through particularly working with the likes of Ian and other farmers, that there are so many factors that influence decision making. And I have to say, as a farmer, if I was in a farmer's shoes, my head would be spinning with the amount of regulation, advisors giving advice, people turning up on the door, information that comes from various sources, and really a water company catchment manager is just another cog in that huge wheel. So I think the question is really, what can a water company add to the mix? And really what we're trying to achieve, we're not trying to duplicate effort that's going on elsewhere, but what we are trying to do is use evidence and information and really try and aim for best practice. And I put a few things down there that I feel that a water company can bring to the table. And, we are a business. We are in the business of supplying water. We do have to do this in a sustainable way to keep customer bills down. We do have shareholders. So working with farmers and other businesses in a business to business way, we're really keen to kind of find mutually beneficial solutions and where possible, share the responsibility for addressing these challenges, because we realize that particularly with diffuse pollution, which I'm going to cover in a bit more detail, it's not as simple as just stopping an activity. So we want to kind of really focus in as a business on how we can support other businesses to be more sustainable and also protect the environment. We gather a huge amount of data, monitoring data, particularly water quality monitoring, but other evidence. And, rather than keeping that information to ourselves, we want to share it with the people that can really make a difference, the experts, the land managers. We do have basis and facts qualified advisors who can, talk specifically with that water focus in mind. We're very keen to bring knowledge and ideas together, disseminate that information, really bring knowledge exchange and transfer to life. And that's something we feel we can do. And we also bring, we are funded through our customers and our regulators to try and improve, reduce the need for future treatment, improve the environment. And we recognize that investing in our catchments and looking at our catchments as our first asset is really, key to being a more sustainable water company. So we've had measures like our Soil Innovation Fund, which I'll mention briefly at the end of the talk, implementing pesticide reduction schemes and supporting farmers and providing incentives to make subtle changes that can improve pesticide getting into water. We've offered pesticide amnesties historically in certain areas where that is particularly need. We fund training, including a range of PA certification. We've started on the journey of payments for cover cropping, which I'm going to cover in a bit more detail later. And then other things like funding pesticide handling areas, spreader sprayer calibration. So a whole range of measures that we can bring. But one of the first things that we really need to address primarily are point source issues. So these are really issues that are impacting directly on the water environment, whether that be rivers, whether that be groundwater, whether that be drinking water quality. This photo I'm showing here is actually an ongoing issue that we are dealing with adjacent to one of our pumping stations. As you can see from the image, this land is directly adjacent to and draining into a chalk stream just on the edge of the Chilterns. And obviously with the weather issues and challenges we've had this season, the cattle feeding station that's been placed in this area, very close to the watercourse, and the high stocking density of cattle on this field has created significant issues. Now, obviously, this is something that we need to question whether certain activities should be taking place in certain locations. And we're working with the farmer and the Environment Agency to kind of address this sooner rather than later. I'm not going to dwell on point source issues, but we really do need, both the water industry, the agricultural industry, and wider land management need to address some of these challenges primarily, and then focus in on what we would call the diffuse pollution challenges. So the next stage of my talk is going to be focused around pesticides. With pesticides is a huge topic, so I'm going to focus in on one particular pesticide, which is becoming a particular challenge for the water industry, which is propyzamide. For those of you not familiar or aware of propyzamide, propyzamide is a post-emergence herbicide that's used to control blackgrass populations, primarily in oilseed rape, but also in some other crops. It has a very short application window. It also doesn't have a maximum dose rate on it. So there is occasions where multiple applications of different propyzamide products can be used. And this is used en masse across our catchments. And I apologize in advance. I will be showing a number of graphs. As a catchment scientist, showing data is really key to what I do. So I do apologize for that. But this graph is taken from our River Thames abstractions, and it shows the seasonal propyzamide concentrations that we detect at the point of abstraction. Now, we are able to treat propyzamide to a certain extent. I mean, it varies from water treatment works to water treatment works, from different types of treatment process and the age of some of the treatment media. But generally, we can remove about 80% of propyzamide. As you can see from the graph, we have a drinking water standard which applies to all pesticides of 0.1 micrograms per litre. And you can see that some of the seasonal spikes that we see each year are significantly higher than that. And some of those have actually, overwhelmed our treatment and led to exceedances, which, obviously is impacting the quality of our water and means that we have to bring water in from other areas. So, and this is a challenge. Although we've had a better season comparative to some of the other years this autumn and winter, a number of water companies across the UK have faced significant challenges with this. And propyzamide really is an emerging challenge for the water industry, and something we're really keen to work with agriculture on. So when we're looking at a pesticide such as propyzamide, we're only a small team with a relatively small amount of funding. So we want to work in the catchments where we're going to get the greatest benefit. So we do have an extensive program of monitoring, which, we have catchment officers out on a weekly basis, taking samples across all of the tributaries of the River Thames and many of the sub-catchments, streams and ditches within those. And we actually work in partnership with Thames Water and South East Water in the whole Thames River Basin. And we do share that data and we bring it together. And as you can see from the map at the bottom, what we refer to as our hotspot map, where the red areas are is where we generally see the highest concentrations of propyzamide and other pesticides. And that's where we really target our efforts. You will note that the Chilterns itself generally comes up as fairly low risk in this kind of hotspot map. Now, that's not to say that propyzamide isn't getting into the rivers of the Chilterns, but actually because they are chalk streams and they are predominantly groundwater fed, the groundwater generally dilutes the concentration of some pesticides in water. But that's not to say that in hotspot areas within the Chilterns chalk streams, there will be high concentrations of pesticides that will have impacts on the aquatic environment. So even though that one is, that area is fairly low risk, it is still the measures that we're looking to implement in the high risk areas are relevant here too. So I mentioned previously around kind of addressing point sources, and this also applies to pesticides as well. A couple of years ago, because our predominant experience was around implementing measures to mitigate metaldehyde. Metaldehyde has an alternative product, ferric phosphate, that can be switched to. So in catchment management terms, it's relatively easy to incentivize farmers and agronomists to switch to ferric phosphate and demonstrate the benefits and from an investment perspective for a water company. We tried that same thing with propyzamide, but because there isn't really an alternative to use for propyzamide, and a lot of the other herbicides to control blackgrass, there is resistance to some of those. We do recognise and we did notice that our scheme wasn't particularly effective at that time. And when we looked in more detail, we did actually note that there were a number of pesticide handling areas in our trial area that were point sources for pesticide pollution. And that really undid any of the stewardship measures that were being implemented by the farmers in that catchment. So we've been investing in a number of pesticide handling areas in our high-risk catchments, and it is widely recognised that the point sources of pesticides are responsible for a significant portion of pesticide loading in water. And then this particular report that was carried out by ADAS on behalf of the Environment Agency did show across a range of catchments that at least 20%, but almost up to 70% of the total loading of pesticides in some catchments can come from the farmyard and the pesticide handling area. Now, generally, water companies will invest in end-of-pipe solutions, so treatment solutions to these problems, but there is a greater recognition that actually investing in infrastructure out in the catchment and actually preventing these issues at the source is going to be exponentially cheaper than trying to mop up the contaminants when they reach the water treatment work. So we've been really using our data and evidence to target where these kind of investments, and the pictures I show here are an example in one of the catchments we worked in, and we actually we provided 50% funding towards this, and it's been a great demonstration site for other farmers in that catchment to come and have a look, see what can be done, and then we can work with the advisors in that catchment to link up with other funding streams through agri-environment, etc. And in the future with ELMS, we'll be really keen to see grants for infrastructure like this being rolled out on a much bigger scale, because they really can have an impact. And actually within the catchment where we have been investing in this, we've seen massive improvements in pesticide concentrations in those areas. So we know these kind of things really can have an effect. So that's really focusing around point sources, but really the bigger challenge comes from diffuse pollution. And this is really where, we recognise that farmers and other pesticide users are generally doing the right thing. They're applying products as per the label requirements, doing everything right. But geology, topography, weather can all have a bearing on this. And we realise that finding solutions to the larger scale diffuse problems is something that we really want to focus our time, resource, and efforts on. And really integrated pest management is the approach that we really want to see support and invest in, and help farmers and other land managers to really, you know, build into their system and really become a business as usual activity. And you know, when I was looking at images to demonstrate IPM, and really it's very similar to me to the waste hierarchy, reuse, reduce, recycle. This is a very similar thing, you know, using cultural controls first, physical controls, biological controls, and really using chemical controls as the last resort. Now, there is a lot going on around IPM at the moment, and the voluntary initiative, which many of you may be aware of, are really, you know, leading the charge around IPM. And they've recently, you know, issued a new IPM plan. And there is a link on the presentation here, which I'm sure can be shared around, or you can Google IPM with the voluntary initiative. And they've actually got a survey online at the moment that they're encouraging farmers and land managers to complete. So I would really encourage people to engage in that process more, contribute to the learning, growth and development around IPM. Now, looking specifically at blackgrass, you know, we've been looking at how, you know, certain measures, particularly cultural measures, but are using IPM to control blackgrass would be the way forward, and what we could look at in a bit more detail. And some of you may be familiar with the 5 for 5 strategy for blackgrass, which has been something that was created a few years ago by Dr. Stephen Moss and Tom Allen Stevens. They both previously with Rothamsted. And what I like about the 5 for 5 is it's not reinventing the wheel. It's quite simplistic. It can be tailored to the needs of a particular farm, a particular field, a particular rotation. And, you know, we wanted to kind of try and understand elements within this and whether we could actually contribute to really understanding, particularly around reducing propyzamide and other herbicide usage, and trying to address the particular challenge that we've got. But it is something I just wanted to include there, because it's something, you know, if I can understand it, anyone can understand it. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to contribute to kind of maybe some of the challenges around propyzamide use, and we really wanted to ask the question: is there an alternative approach to blackgrass control? And we put here on lower risk fields. Now we recognise that there are certain fields that have a significantly high population of blackgrass, and you know, we completely appreciate that the farmer would not want to consider alternative chemical strategies on those fields, but we did wonder whether on other fields where there's maybe not as prevalent populations of blackgrass, whether there was another way of doing things. And we actually teamed up with Dr. Stephen Moss to carry out a replicated field trial, which we started last year at a plot in Hertfordshire. We did the field trial over 12 plots. The first stage was to carry out resistance testing across the catchment and the trial plot to understand, you know, kind of the levels of resistance in blackgrass within that area. But the big question that was posed was, can clethodim be used to partially substitute propyzamide? So actually challenging the maximum, the recommended dose rates for propyzamide. Now, this is something we did get quite a bit of challenge with when we started out on this, but because we're not necessarily bound by, you know, the other kind of the work that's gone into developing the label requirements, etc., we just wanted to see if we could try something a little bit different. So the clethodim was applied early in mid-October of 2019, and then we on the different trial plots, propyzamide and propyzamide was applied the following month. Plant counts were carried out before and after each stage just to see what was actually happening. And then the graph that you see in the bottom right-hand corner there was produced in January after propyzamide had time to take effect. Now, what we found really interesting here, and as you can see from the graph below, that we tried a number of different dose rates of propyzamide. We tried clethodim on its own, but we also tried clethodim following propyzamide at 500 grams per hectare, clethodim followed by propyzamide at 750 grams per hectare, and then upwards, increasing the dose rate. And then we did the same thing with carbetamide. And what we found really interesting there was actually reducing the dose rate of propyzamide after using clethodim, we found the control of blackgrass to be particularly high and comparative to increased dose rates of propyzamide. So, you know, although this is a small scale trial, it did show that actually reducing the dose of propyzamide, and if that was done on, you know, on a whole catchment scale, particularly on lower risk fields, that actually the loading of propyzamide getting into water at these particular times of year potentially could come down. So we want to, obviously, we have, you know, learn more about this and see whether that was just a one-off or actually we see this in other areas. So we have expanded the trial for this year, and we've included Anglian water, and we now have a number of trial sites in a number of different regions to really understand whether there is actually a consistent result coming out of this. And we're hopefully going to have those results fairly soon. So I might be able to share those in future. So another thing around, obviously, pesticide application and using propyzamide as the example is whether there was a way that we could support farmers in their decision making on when the products are to be applied. And you know, obviously, weather conditions, rainfall coming in, all of these can have a significant bearing on the amount of pesticide that either leaches into the drains, goes out into the rivers. So we wanted to see whether we could improve the forecasting accuracy, and we teamed up with a company called Sencrop SAS, and it's actually a Sencrop weather station that's part of the prize draw today. With a number of farmers that we've been working with in our scheme area, we've actually been offering the Sencrop weather stations as part of our, you know, signing up to our schemes. And we wanted to see whether farmers, A, thought it was any good, whether they thought the days were useful, whether they were actually using it to inform decision making. So we've got 14, well, I think there's actually more than 14 now established across our area. Now, the good thing about Sencrop is it's a smart system. So the more of them you put out there, the more accuracy in the data improves, the accuracy in forecasting improves. So they're all connected up to a network. So farmers who are signed up to the service and have the app can access the data for all stations on the network. It can provide 15-minute, 1 hour and daily data that's generated. We've had really good feedback on the app and the live forecasting from the farmers that are using it at the moment. It can create custom alerts as well for ideal spraying conditions. So really, you know, when I was challenged on this internally, why are we kind of funding a network of weather stations? Really, if we can, you know, do anything to inform decision making on when these pesticides are applied and keep them on the land where they're actually going to have the benefit that's needed, then, you know, for me, that's a good investment decision for a water company. And because of the positive feedback we've had from farmers, this is something that we're going to be keen to roll out on a larger scale. And it is actually, it's shown some really interesting results, particularly local microclimates. I know working with some of the farmers I've worked with for many years, they've always said that, oh, we always seem to get more rain on our fields than the neighbours. And I did take that with a pinch of salt, but actually the weather stations in certain cases have actually proven that. So I know, you know, interrogating some of the data is very interesting. So if you are a farmer in the area, I would encourage you to visit the Sencrop website and just have a read yourself. And if it's something you're interested in, I mean, contact us as well. And if you're within one of our scheme areas, it's something we might be able to help with. But as a weather station on its own, they're relatively cheap, relatively easy to set up. And yeah, we've had really good feedback on them. So that concludes the section of my talk on pesticide. And the next day, I'm going to talk about nitrate. Now, nitrate is something that we've been investigating, kind of the sources and pathways for nitrate for a number of years now. But in the last year, we've actually started implementing schemes on the ground to mitigate nitrate. And this has been a really interesting journey for both myself and my team, because, you know, with some of the measures that we've been deploying around nitrate, we've realized that there are significant wider benefits that can be achieved from some of these measures. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that on top of the water quality challenge. Now, I really like this graph, and this really shows how nitrogen has been key to feeding the growing global population, and you know, the kind of the growth of nitrogen use has really coincided with the increased yields of cereals, and you know, as a layman, I'm not a farmer, seeing how, you know, developments in both fertilizer use and other technologies, and how that is really, you know, increase the yield of crop you can get from a field is amazing. And, you know, it's absolutely key to feeding the global population. And, you know, I think this graph really shows, you know, pretty much, particularly since, the end of World War II, just how much, you know, that's grown. And, you know, I was interested in something that James Rebank said within his talk about the, you know, the agricultural intensification after World War II, and the change in the landscape and the way that crops are grown and land is managed. And I think that's really, you know, it's demonstrated both here in the increase of yields of these crops, but also this data set, which comes from the River Thames. And I believe it's one of the longest historical water quality data sets out there. And it shows nitrate concentrations that have been kind of analysed in the River Thames. And really, this almost shows a direct correlation with the previous graph I've shown. And this is obviously one of the unintended consequences of agricultural intensification and the losses of nitrate and other nutrients into the water environment. And, you know, we've seen that significant increase in nitrate concentrations. It has kind of leveled out from around the 1980s, which is probably around the time of both nitrate vulnerable zones and greater regulation around fertilizer use, but also the increase in precision farming and precision farming technology. But as you can see, concentration of nitrate is particularly high. Now, the other issue with nitrate is leachy. It doesn't bind to the soil particularly well, and it is particularly leachy in clay soils, which are prevalent across the Affinity supply area, and particularly in the Chilterns. And I mean, I do like, you know, although this is quite a humorous cartoon, I think it really does kind of demonstrate in quite simplistic terms the issues around nitrate leaching, particularly over winter when you've got more rainfall. And this really does reflect. So I'm gonna show a few slides now that demonstrate what this impact is having to groundwater and the aquatic environment as well. So really, when obviously lots of fertilizer is applied, the crops are taking up some of that nutrient, but any nitrate that really falls below the root zone, what happens to it? Well, generally it gets stored in what we refer to as the unsaturated zone. But when you have heavy rainfall, that's leaching some of that nitrate down into groundwater. The rising and falling water table can also mobilize some of that nitrate that's sitting in the unsaturated zone. And where you've got the case of chalk streams, such as those in the Chilterns, which are predominantly groundwater fed, that nitrate then is returning back to those chalk streams and can have impacts, you know, both to the environment and to water quality for drinking water. And this really emphasizes that. And you know, excessive nutrients and nitrate is particularly challenging for drinking water. We rely on either blending of nitrate contaminated water with other cleaner sources to bring the concentrations down so they're safe to send into supply, which is a logistical challenge and quite intensive in terms of energy. And then nitrate treatment and removal is a particularly expensive and energy intensive treatment process, and one that generally we would be keen to avoid. In some cases it's unavoidable, but generally if we can find solutions to reducing nitrate in the catchment, that would be a much better solution, particularly because of the environmental impact it has, you know, with eutrophication, the algal blooms that can kind of appear as a result of that, depleted oxygen, which can have an impact on aquatic organisms, fish. Really, we need to reduce the amount of nutrients that are being lost from the field and you know, industry and other sources. And this study is another one that we were particularly interested in, because there's a recognised kind of a term known as peak nitrate, and that peak usage of nitrate and losses into the environment generally considered around the mid 1990s, which is from this graph here, you can see that is fairly consistent with the Permo-Triassic rocks, Oolitic limestones, and other formations. But chalk, which generally stores significantly more nitrate. Now this graph shows that actually peak nitrate is probably extended a little bit later. So we are probably at the point now where we're starting to see peak nitrate concentrations getting into groundwater. Now there is a time lag from the point that nitrate hits a chalk aquifer to it being abstracted at our water treatment works, which can vary. It can be a matter of days depending on the geology, or it can be in the order of decades. And we've done a lot of work for individual sources to understand what that might be. And I'm using an example here of nitrate concentrations in one of our groundwater sources on the edge of the Chilterns. And what we've done is we've used the water quality data that we had up to that point, and we've used modelling to predict the future concentrations and what that's actually going to mean for that particular water treatment works. And as you can see there, I mean, we are anticipating that we'll see the peak nitrate concentrations abstracted at this particular water treatment works around 2040. So the long-term nitrate trend is going up, and we're already seeing peaks in nitrate above the drinking water standard at this particular abstraction, and that's only going to get worse. But what we wanted to understand was whether actually if we could reduce the amount of nitrate leaching into groundwater, what impact that would have. And under that modelled scenario, although we can't necessarily arrest the long-term trend of hitting peak nitrate around 2040, under this scenario, if we were to reduce leaching of nitrate by around 50%, we would start to see a longer-term benefit. Now, although this, it's not particularly good reading because we can't maybe address the issue immediately like we can with some of our challenges with other pollutants such as pesticides. In terms of longer term investment in treatment assets, this does demonstrate that by doing catchment management alongside water treatment, that we can have a longer term benefit and ultimately a more sustainable supply, more sustainable cost of water in the future. So this has been really used to determine actually there is a lot of benefit for a water company investing in catchment-based solutions for nitrate. Now, I wanted to show this graph as well. This is actually from another groundwater source in North Hertfordshire. And I did mention that we might not be able to arrest the longer term trend. But this graph, so the blue line on this graph actually shows the groundwater levels during this period from 2001 to the end of 2020. And the purple line shows the nitrate concentration. And as you can see, there is a seasonal correlation with the rising and falling water table, which is around what we refer to as the recharge period, that period over autumn and winter, which we rely on to replenish our aquifers and to supply water in the summer and obviously support groundwater flow all year round. Now we see under low groundwater levels that the nitrate concentrations stay reasonably low, and then under, you can see from the high groundwater levels that we experienced in early 2014, the nitrate concentrations increased quite significantly. And this really does show where the rising and falling groundwater table is mobilizing some of that nitrogen that's leached beyond the root zone, and it's mobilizing that into groundwater. And as you can see, we've had a particularly wet autumn and winter this year, and that that has reflected in nitrate concentrations at this particular water treatment works. And we haven't seen the end of the full recharge period yet. So we anticipate that both groundwater levels are going to continue to rise and nitrate concentration. So that's going to be a big challenge for us this year at this particular abstraction. But what it does show to me is if we can reduce year on year the amount of that nitrogen that is leaching below the root zone, that actually we might be able to knock off some of these seasonal peaks. So actually we might be able to, you know, keep improve water quality in the short to medium term as well as the longer term investment. So we've started to really look at some of the measures that can, you know, prevent this nitrogen leaching and fix some of the nitrate and prevent it leaching beyond the root zone. And you know, cover crops is really our starting point, and it's where we've tried to do quite a bit of research and investigation. And my colleague Sean Dowman produced this really, you know, kind of simple image that demonstrates. So where, you know, post harvest, at that point when we get the, you know, the highest rainfall, we've got, you know, the most amount of bare soil across our catchment, and that's when we see the greatest recharge and the greatest leaching of nitrate. Now, if we're able to put something in during that period and cover up those bare fields, you know, really the theory is that we can actually lock and capture and fix some of that nitrogen and prevent it leaching into the unsaturated zone, then to be mobilized into groundwater. And that's what we really wanted to try and understand a bit better. So across our supply area, we've conducted a number of cover crop trials, and we've been very fortunate that a number of farmers are incredibly supportive of the work we do and have offered us up some land to carry out these trial sites, have been, you know, put up with us nagging, turning up at ridiculous times, you know, bringing machinery, putting porous pots in. But, you know, it has been incredibly useful for us to really quantifying the benefits that cover crops, as an example, could have on reducing that nitrate leaching. So really the principle behind this is we have a number of plots, a control plot that is just a bare cultivated plot, and then a number of different plots where different cover crops or cover crop mixes are drilled. And then what we do is we install porous pots, like on the diagram on the right hand side, about 90 centimeters below the ground, below the root zone. And then what we do is we any water that's leaching through into those, we then analyze that and actually see, has there been a reduction in nitrate leaching from that particular cover crop. Now this graph, this was one of our earlier cover crop trials back in 2018. And you can see that plot number 1 was the bare uncultivated plot. And then the 2, 3, 4, and 5 were different cover crops. And as you can see, there's been a significant reduction in the amount of nitrate that we were picking up in the porous pot samples. And that was pretty much consistent across the board, regardless of the cover crop, where there are some more effective than others. And as an example, oil radish, this is one from one of our more recent trials. And we have, you know, steadily adapted and adjusted these trials just to pick up more and more information and understanding around this. And this is another example from this season's cover crop, well, last season's cover crop trial, I apologise. And you know, the different graphs here show the plot with oil radish versus the bare cultivated plot with no cover crop at all. And I think, you know, you can see the difference in nitrate concentrations that were picked up from the porous pot sampling, and that was consistent across the board. And you know, we could just see how much of that nitrate was being fixed by the oil radish. So, you know, these trials have really helped us to say, actually, there's definitely scope for Affinity and us as a water company to invest in cover crops on a much larger scale. The question we had was really, how could we incentivize or invest in increasing the amount of cover cropping across our catchments? And this has really been the big challenge for us this year. And we've run a trial for the past couple of years on this around, can we create a market for trading what's known as ecosystem services, but in this particular case, improvements in water quality through growing cover crops. And we've partnered up with Cambridge Water in this area, because Cambridge Water, so within the scheme area that you can see on the map on the right hand side, they also have a number of nitrate affected groundwater sources within this area. And generally we see across the whole of the chalk band from East Anglia down to Wessex, this is an issue right across the chalk. So we wanted to take this little section of the chalk band and see whether how possible would it be to increase cover cropping on a larger scale. So we've worked with a company called Nitrate, which is a reverse auction platform, and really, I mean, it's quite a complicated thing to describe, but it's basically almost like an eBay in reverse, and farmers can log on to the portal. They can choose which type of cover crop they wish to grow, and there's a list of the species that we offer as part of that. And we do encourage a mix of those as well. Originally, some of the trials were just using a single cover crop, but we do recognise that by mixing cover crops, there are a much wider set of benefits for biodiversity, for soil health, etc. So, but those are the ones to choose from. And we ran our first auction in 2019, just over a 2-week period, just to see whether there'd be any interest. And we actually had a pretty good success. So we expanded it this year, and actually the auction that was run in June 2020, right in the middle of the lockdown and pandemic first time round, that was another big challenge for us, whether actually we could deliver a scheme like this during such exceptional times. And the good thing about Nitrate and having the web platform and also a phone app is it can actually be done remotely, and it didn't need a lot of face-to-face. And it was relatively straightforward and user-friendly. And we got a pretty good uptake. And actually, we've been successfully able to fund over 800 hectares of cover crops across this scheme area in the last year. And I think we've got some, and here's some of the photos that have been taken of some of those cover crops over this winter. And many of those have now been kind of destroyed, ready for spring drilling. But we had really good, the growth on the cover crops. Not all of them are as impressive as some of Ian's cover crops he grows on his farm, but just to see that reduction in bare fields, bare soil across some of our more vulnerable catchments, and seeing, this, and not to mention, there, even in November, we were seeing lots of pollinators and lots of life around these cover crops, and really it just, it was quite inspiring just to see the life and the colour in these areas, and we were very, very pleased with that. And here, I mean, there's a lot of detail in the graphs on the side, but really, in essence, we got a lot of information out of this auction around, what kind of average price would be set. So the farmers very much set the price that they're willing to pay, and it generates an average price at the end. And for the 2 auctions that we've run, although there were varying levels of competitiveness within the auction, the average price did stay around the same. And for the 807 hectares of cover crop that we've been able to incentivise over this autumn and winter, the clever algorithms within the Nitrate system have estimated a reduction of nitrate leaching into groundwater of about 36 tonnes. So, really impressive numbers on that. And that's something that was relatively easy to deliver for a water company. And we have had positive feedback from the farmers that have been involved in it. So it's something that we'll be looking to build upon, expand, and see what other measures we can incorporate within, such an auction. So I mentioned briefly about, going out and seeing these cover crops and seeing some of the life within the cover crops. And we really, I've had, a bit of a personal revelation around this, and seeing that, in terms of, reducing nitrate leaching into groundwater, cover crops can be highly successful. But there are also a range of other benefits from them, in terms of reduced sediment loss, increased infiltration, which I'm going to just kind of labour that point in a minute. They can have benefits for flood risk management by holding a lot more soil on the land, reducing siltation of particularly chalk streams, but other rivers, improving their capacity to handle water during rainfall events. The obvious, kind of bridge for biodiversity, in particular pollinators, at a time when there isn't really a lot out there for them. There are huge benefits around soil health, which, that would be a whole talk on it in itself, around soil health benefits and things like cover crops and other land management measures. It's great as part of an IPM strategy as well, and it can, as part of a rotation, suppress certain pests and weeds and become part of that strategy to reduce chemical control as well. Another area that we're interested in, because the water industry has committed to be net carbon zero by 2030, and Affinity Water don't have a huge amount of land holdings where we can do carbon reduction measures. So there is the potential here if we can, effectively measure it around carbon capture and offsetting. And I know that's a very, hot topic within the agricultural sector as well. And really, I've mentioned farm productivity there, but, the improvements in soil health and structure and organic matter within the soil will, in the longer term, hopefully have a benefit for farm productivity. Having something on the ground also reduces wind erosion. So there, just from one relatively simple thing, there are a huge amount of ecosystem services that can be derived from it. So I mentioned infiltration there, and this is an area that I'm particularly interested in. And we are in an area of serious water stress. We have all the concerns and risks and impacts of abstraction on chalk streams, and I am a believer that kind of agricultural intensification, post World War II, has changed the landscape. The landscape has generally been engineered to move water out of catchments as quickly as possible, and not necessarily holding that water on the land and allowing it to naturally infiltrate into groundwater and replenish the aquifers. And this is an area that I think water companies can be investing in measures such as cover crops, not just for water quality, but actually to improve the amount of water that gets into the groundwater, and support a more sustainable kind of supply of water for both water supply and replenishing chalk streams as well. So we commissioned this was a very small scale study just to see whether cover crops can actually have a benefit for infiltration and improvement in aquifer recharge. And I have heard conflicting arguments around this. So we wanted to run this study, and a number of different cover crops were kind of tested, primarily under laboratory conditions, by Cranfield University, and the results showed a significant improvement of both in the infiltration rate with all of the cover crops, but also a significant reduction of soil erosion. And that was the case across all of the cover crop mixes that were tested. And we tried to align those with the ones that we're offering as incentives within the Nitrate cover crop scheme. One point particularly of note was the oat, mustard and Phacelia mix did particularly well, both in terms of improved infiltration, but also reducing soil erosion. So that showed real promise for us that, if this is something we could do on a much larger scale, what kind of benefits, how could we quantify the long-term benefits to water resources, and how much of a long-term improvement would that make? And this project also looked at that under future climate change scenarios, and really even with some of the challenging climate change scenarios, additional benefits were also derived. So we're really now questioning both how we invest in improving groundwater resources, maybe not just focusing on larger infrastructure schemes, large transfers, but actually, changing fundamentally the way that land can be managed. And, cover crops is really the first step into that. And it's the first simple measure that can be, both deployed by farmers, but also incentivized by the likes of water companies. And now we're very much looking around to see whether there are other industries, businesses that would also be keen to start buying into these ecosystem services. And, it doesn't just have to be water quality, it doesn't have to be infiltration, but it can be improved biodiversity. And we really believe that actually there can be a market that can be created for this. And hopefully this is something that will be growing and generating alongside the development of ELMs, and something that Affinity Water and other water companies can lead the charge on.
Could I just interrupt you there, Alister, and could you start winding down, because we've already run over a little bit and we really want to get a few questions in. So
final slide, Ian. So
excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so just bringing that to a close then, yeah. And really these kind of small scale studies, investigations have really changed our thinking around what we should be focusing in on, moving away from looking at a single issue, trying to tackle a single issue, into looking at the bigger picture and really going forward. Affinity Water are putting soil health at the heart of everything we do within catchment management. And as you can see from this diagram here, we believe improved soil health and increased soil organic matter can have a whole range of benefits, you know, beyond just improving water quality. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that interesting.
Thank you ever so much, Alister. That was really engaging, and you covered a hell of a lot of subjects. Yeah, we're back on, right. Got quite a few questions, so I'll start with one on the VI and IPM. Obviously, a lot of acronyms there. Would you like to expand on those acronyms a bit so that everybody really understands what they're all about, and what the new IPM plan is really driving to try and achieve?
Yes, so certainly. So yeah, so the voluntary initiative is, you know, it's a kind of a group of organisations, including the National Farmers Union, the agrochemical companies, agronomists, AIC, a whole range of organisations coming together around primarily pesticide stewardship and integrated pest management, which I've mentioned previously, is going to be the driving force around a more sustainable use of pesticides in the future. And it's going to be one of the key components of delivering the Sustainable Use Directive. Now, there are probably far more knowledgeable people on this webinar than I around this, but I sit on the VI group representing the UK water industry, and we really feed into the voluntary initiative what is being seen by water companies in water, so it can really help focus and target where some of the changes need to be made. And IPM is going to be a huge part of that. Pesticide stewardship schemes such as the metaldehyde stewardship group previously, or the oilseed rape herbicide Think Water campaign, all get generated through the voluntary initiative. And you know, we are an active partner within the voluntary initiative, really raising the profile of some of the challenges. So it's a great kind of repository of information and knowledge exchange around making sure that pesticides are having a much less impact on the environment. Thank you for that.
Going on to one about propyzamide, a lot of people might know it as curb. I knew exactly what you're talking about, but we'll elaborate on that slightly. So that herbicide is used on oilseed rape and beans. I do use it, and I really think it's a necessary tool in the challenge against blackgrass. You know, there is dim resistance out there, which is within part of your trial. You know, there are DIMs used, so it's quite a challenge when there's already dim resistant on a farm. So I always take the view that, you know, curb's okay as long as you don't get a major rain event afterwards, because as ever with weather, we never really know what's coming next, and it's what happens in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Because I don't know if everybody knows, and I'll perhaps save you the challenge of doing this, is propyzamide actually binds to the soil particles, and when you get bigger rain events, potentially any discoloured water coming off the field has got propyzamide mixed with it. And so, as Alister is explaining, it's a real challenge knowing, you know, forecasting we can do so much, but you're not going to cover all the bases with that. And then it's about having a healthy soil and a soil that's capable of taking that water that falls on it and not running off. So I sort of answered the question I've asked Alister, I know, but I just thought I'd sort of elaborate on that slightly. So, because it is, you know, I certainly know, I don't know if you want to share, but the significant high levels this year in the rain events sort of in the north of your catchment. I don't know if you want to tell people how bad they were.
Yeah, I mean, so we're feeding into one of the reservoirs that we take an import from. Some of the concentrations have reached as much as 170 times the drinking water standard, which, you know, that is far beyond anything a water company could cope with, and that would likely have, you know, impacts on the aquatic environment as well. And And, you know, we absolutely recognise that pesticides, you know, propyzamide, etc., do need to be used. But, you know, I do go back to the kind of the integrated pest management strategy. And is it always the right thing to use first? Are there other ways to do it? And like you say, Ian, you know, if in certain cases, actually, when it's used and how it's applied can have, you know, even slight, you know, challenging decision making can have a, you know, an unintended impact on the environment. And that's one of the things that we recognise, and we are trying to improve and inform that decision making in the best way we can. But that's why really the key, and our study wasn't necessarily focusing on the fields with the highest blackgrass populations, but actually, does it need to be used everywhere? Are there alternative options? You know, can cover crops and other, you know, other approaches control blackgrass as well? Should that be included? I know there's been a lot more winter cropping. You know, the growth of winter cropping has increased, and I think that's increased blackgrass prevalence as well. So, you know, should there be consideration given to the changes in rotation? You know, one of the trials that we're looking to run next year is actually identifying that there are possibly fields within some of our catchments that are so high risk that really, you know, oilseed rape should not be grown on them. And can we actually work with farmers to set a price for actually changing the crop that is grown on those fields, and using that evidence that we can get through our work, actually, you know, are there different solutions to this? So propyzamide can be used in the right place, in the right way, at the right time, and it won't have the level of environmental impact that it's having at the moment, because I think losing that as an active for the industry would be a massive challenge. So, but there's got to be a way that we reduce its use overall. And that's something that I'm really keen to kind of work with the industry a lot more on.
Yeah, well, propyzamide is one of the massive challenges, because you don't want to use it too early because it degrades in the sunlight quite quickly, and you can't use it too late because it's got a cut-off date, and in the middle of all that is a lot of potentially wet weather for some of the, you know, quite wet months, December, January, which is the ideal time to use it. Is not the ideal time as far as weather goes, so it is a real big challenge. Moving on to nitrates. Do you see problems going forward with potential loss of urea out of the system? And we're more reliant on ammonium nitrate then?
I mean, I'm not an expert in this area by any means, but I do think that could have some challenges around, you know, obviously the mix of products that can be used. I don't know enough about it to speak with authority on that subject. So my view would always be around actually how can we reduce the need for fertilizer applications at all? Are there other ways around, you know, catching and fixing that nitrogen that doesn't need additional applications? So maybe Ian, you can answer that one a little bit better than I can.
Well, we're running out of time, so that could take me all night to explain that one. Just moving on to cover crops quickly. Will Affinity be running reverse auctions in the sort of Chilterns ends of the catchment?
My ambition, definitely. You know, we've got to, you know, I think in the longer term, this will be part of the more kind of sustainable management of the catchment in future, particularly around preserving water resources and improving chalk streams. At the moment, I'm funded to deliver it around certain nitrate effective sources, but we are having the discussions internally, and my ambition would be to see this type of approach not just being delivered on a landscape scale by Affinity Water, but being delivered by everybody. And there is an organisation called Water Resources in the Southeast, which looks at strategic regional planning for water resources, and that work's currently ongoing at the moment. And there's some big step changes within that, starting to look at catchment measures around improving land use and the environment. And, you know, very much the discussions around that are these kind of landscape scale measures. So not just focusing in a small area. And that was one of the interesting things from the pilot scheme that we ran over in North Hertfordshire, that actually initially we were going to look at it just around our nitrate effective sources. But we recognised very early that actually to create competition and to deliver some of the wider benefits, that you can see from cover crops, that it needed to be done on a much larger scale. So yes, I'd very much like to see them in the Chilterns in future.
So I suppose this is the final one. So your wish list for environmental land management schemes going forward, I dare say, I'm going to answer it for you. You probably want to see cover crops in there. Any other sort of really key things you'd like to see supported through environmental land management going forward?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Simplicity is the first thing I'd like to see from environmental land management schemes. Something that's easy, uncomplicated, that you know isn't going to put people off, and you know, and able to tap into some of the funding. If it's focused around delivering environmental outcomes in catchments, then the measures, in my opinion, should be tailored to the needs of a particular catchment or a landscape. But I would very much like to see funding to support farmers to improve infrastructure. You know, we have recognised that things like pesticide handling areas, you know, they don't make farmers money, but they can costs. And you know, providing investment in infrastructure to prevent contaminants escaping into the environment, for me, would be absolutely key. A real focus around measures to improve soil health, to improve microbial activity, to improve soil organic carbon, anything that really goes into that mix. And you know, I'm a firm believer that farmers are the experts in this area. So I really hope that DEFRA listen to farmers and actually take on board, you know, some of the wider measures that can be deployed. Cover crops, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of cover crops for a whole range of reasons. But yeah, I just want something that's simplistic, easy to tap into, and then linked up with the private public sector funding. You know, the kind of things that the water industry can then complement and actually use evidence to support what's going to work in the right place and where.
Thank you ever so much, Alister. I'm sorry we've overrun everybody slightly, but I see there's still quite a hardcore group of people here listening. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've got something from it. As ever, it's designed to help you engage, and I hope you've found that. Our next presentation will be on wildlife, and that will be given by Kirsty, who works for Oak Bank, and we've had her boss here tonight, so obviously seeing how it goes, so that's quite interesting. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week, and really looking forward to Kirsty's presentation, and thank you once again, Alister.